Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Guo. As Emma mentioned, I am here to talk about the state of startups and AI today, and why actually you don't need to be afraid of the model labs as builders eating your lunch. I want to say special thanks to Vijay and team for having me here, and also to Andre Karpathy, Noam Brown, and Pranav Reddy for their help and ideas with this talk. As Emma mentioned, I'm the founder of Conviction, and along with my partner, Mike Vernal, a friend and fan of Statsigs. We're an AI-native venture firm, and we launched just before ChatGPT did, so it's been almost 3 years now, with the premise that a once-in-a-lifetime technology shift required an AI-native venture firm to support it. And so we've been lucky enough to partner early with a number of AI application and lab companies that have had a really big impact on the industry in the short 3 years we've been partnering with companies. And then before this, Mike and I and our team have backed some important companies, including Statsig, but also Cursor, Figma, Notion, Rippling, Clay, companies where AI has become very core to their mission. So we're all in here. And for you and your friends, we also run Embed, a selective grant program for 0 to 1 startups. Please refer. So all that preamble to say, we think that there's a really large change happening at massive speed. And we called this Software 3.0. And this is a hat tip originally to Karpathy. Software 1.0 is the sort of engineering that all of our teams have done for a very long time. It is explicit logic written line by line. And Software 2.0, which many of you guys are very familiar with as well, was traditional machine learning. So this is handcrafted features, custom pipelines, trained from scratch, really effective, but expensive, right, and hard to deploy, and so very important at companies that were data and resource rich with really large scale, like a Facebook or a Meta, for example, but not universally deployed. For us, Software 3.0 changes a lot. We think of it as the era of intelligence as a service. And the job of the builders in this generation is to manipulate and contextualize and compose that intelligence into applications that are useful for users. We think this really changes the value equation in software with more possible value creation from a smaller number of people, right? This sort of leverage is definitionally a great time to be a startup. I'm biased on this point, but I also think there's real advantages to being small today or having that ethos. And so I'm really thrilled to start off your morning by talking about a few things that could be useful. The tools that we now have access to in quick review. I'm not going to do like the history of machine learning, don't worry. The markets that they're opening up to all of us, where we're actually seeing value be created and concentrate, and then also how to build lasting defenses. I think this has been a big debate in the technology community. So, in approximately chronological order, we had scaling give us raw capability. Alignment turned these token predictions into assistance, a much better experience for many use cases. Reasoning was a new vector of scaling with chain of thought and verifier loops and test time compute, allowing us to think harder about problems, come to better answers. Grounding tethered these models to retrieval, context, and actions in software, and then multimodality let models see and hear. In 2025, we're entering the era of agency. I always hesitate to use this word because it is used so often that it is one of those things that almost has no meaning. But we will say that these are model-based products that plan, remember, and orchestrate across tools. And I think, just because this is the conference of a company that has such amazing infrastructure, all of this innovation has been accompanied by efficiency work, right? Distillation, quantization, systems work that allows this to be deployed at scale. But if I look at this set of capabilities, I'm like, wow, if we froze research today, we could spend a decade exploiting what's already here. We have not caught up to, it wasn't exactly chronological. These things happen in parallel as well. But we haven't caught up to, 2022 tools given to the industry. And I think to sort of the ethos of Statsig, exploiting each of these capabilities in every domain, and then figuring out what else we need to explore in order to better serve users in that domain, that's got to be an iterative exercise, right? We're talking about all of the knowledge work available to the world and lots of new experiences. And so we have this toolkit. I think we spent a lot of time trying to understand that toolkit, and then thinking about what markets does that then open us up for us. I'm a really simple frameworks person. At Conviction, we cluster most applications into one of three areas. Copilots that make people more productive, autopilots that try to do a sort of a horizontal function end-to-end, and then, because we couldn't come up with a better name, everyone's a pilot, right? Things that democratize capabilities, as MA alluded to. I think this is both really powerful and also pretty hard from a product perspective. Let's talk about some obvious examples. The most popular one would be, can you give non-technical or technically adjacent, right, like idea guys and gals, the ability to ship software? This is amazing, but the question is, can they actually spec and validate that software well? It's a really hard question. Companies like HeyGen allow you to create communication video with people talking in dollars per minute instead of requiring a professional studio. I am really bullish about some of the applications that are creativity and communication oriented, because that dynamic I just described, I think it is a universal desire to create or communicate, and users are actually reasonably good at describing what they want in context and then validating whether or not it is what they want. Other functions, we're gonna get there, but it is more complicated. Maybe one example I will describe is not a field I have expertise in, but I think it's just interesting because there's a lot of focus on AI for science right now. In the area of biomedical research, you might have a wet lab scientist that has an assay, that's doing experiments, and they end up with a bunch of data. Actually, many people in this room have been the type of person delivered this data before. But this wet lab scientist, they need a computational biologist to go operate on the results of every experiment in order to make progress. And that is a huge blocker to the speed of progress in biotech research today. There are companies like this one in our most recent incubator batch, Biomni, that allow you to take some of these common tasks that you would ask a computational person in your team to help you out with, so you're not stuck on that. But you still have all of these complexities around whether you can describe the problem and then validate the outputs. But I think this sort of ability to democratize capability, either for individuals or in teams, is really powerful. Beyond the sort of more obvious categories, we think there's newer territory as well. My partner, Mike Vernal, thinks a lot about this idea that you can do things at novel scale. And one example would be machines can now interrogate humans. They can ask us questions. And so there's a company in our portfolio called Listen Labs, and it automates customer research and makes it more dynamic, right? We think we're very early in AI native design. So I don't think that the long-term end of all product is going to be a open chat box, right? And so we're looking for products that rethink workflows. We think that there's going to be AI native social media gaming applications. And one example would be Hux. So this is, how many people have tried or used Notebook LM at some point? Nice, it's a cool product, one of the more recent cool products from Google. So that team left Google, and they started this thing called Hux, which is personalized audio content for you delivered in a continual way, right? So it's your own podcast forever. And so I think there are these experiences that were never possible before that we're really interested in. And then finally, there are large, important, unsolved domains, right? I alluded to biology before. Everybody wants that industry to be more productive and more efficient. Robotics, anything in the physical world, right? Material science, physics simulation. There are a lot of things that are really unsolved by next token prediction and internet data. And so these are hard tasks that we think teams should go apply. Research, data collection, cleverness, and concentrated effort too. But the key point on the market side is the map is not the territory in software anymore. And the old maps of software markets might have pointed you to there are these few consumer categories, and these few infra categories, and these few enterprise software categories. And we think that's misleading. Categories that looked small expand dramatically when AI makes work more accessible. I'll mention something counterintuitive. Beyond coding, the most conservative low-tech industries actually seem to be adopting AI fastest. We call this the AI leapfrog effect. I'll give you a few examples. So Sierra is a customer service company. They automate 70% of tickets within their customer base. They serve companies that you're probably customers of, like ADT, SiriusXM, large consumer and finance, and those types of firms. Harvey is a portfolio company that has raced to over 100 million of run rate. Its AI is becoming essential to being competitive as a lawyer, and also especially as a junior lawyer, not hating your life. It takes a lot of the toil out of document understanding, right, or discovery. Open Evidence, I think, is a really inspiring company. I was one of the partners at my former firm tasked with like, hey, tech person, go understand healthcare, right? It's important to us all. 20% of the economy. They could probably use some better technology. And I was like, yeah, let's go give them some data warehousing or something. And the first realization after spending a bunch of time in this area was like, wow, the incentives are really complex. There's a lot of regulatory capture. And it's like for good reason, it's a risk-averse industry. It's just not going to move very fast. And we made some investments. But my conclusion, broadly as a technologist, was like, oh, I can't spend my life on that. That's going to be so slow. And I feel very differently now. So Open Evidence launched a product about 2 years ago, and it reaches about half the doctors in the US every week, and the average user uses it every day, right? This is amazing speed for healthcare. What it does is clinical decision support. So I'm from Wisconsin. This is not a knock on rural hospitals, but did somebody just cheer? Sick. I never get that. This is a great group. Okay. If you are a doctor in rural Wisconsin and you face, unfortunately, like a really complex oncology case of which you've never seen before, and the rate of advancement of medical literature is amazingly high, and you haven't seen some clinical study at the Mayo Clinic about like a second-line therapy for this particular type of patient, your patient is out of luck. Right? And what something like Open Evidence does is say, like, OK, well, you can have personalized queries about any patient type, any situation, and we will retrieve and reason against peer-reviewed medical journals and research so you can know the latest and greatest all the time. Right? And so I think that there are huge opportunities to change industries that really have the need and actually have like a lot of structural inefficiency because they're finally products that are interesting enough for them to adopt. I'm actually going to, I think, skip this slide just out of lack of time. But we have a whole list of ideas of things we think should exist because the capabilities support them and there's user demand on our website. But the territory is wide open. I think that we've seen massive adoption, first, like, incredible world-changing adoption in things like ChatGPT for the broad consumer. But we're probably in inning 1 of the enterprise, right? And I mean actually just like any B2B problem-solving statement. Maybe I'll just mention 2. SMB commerce is an amazing entrepreneurial pursuit. You have platforms like Shopify that have made it much, much easier for people who have a really fun idea for a brand or a passion for curation in a particular domain to become entrepreneurs. And so having the one-stop shop for a site and checkout and inventory management and all of that has been amazing. And yet, I have friends who are D2C brands entrepreneurs, and the thing that people struggle with is like, actually, you still have to manage a really complicated business, right? Full stack, you have to do like marketing, sales, inventory management, supply chain. You have to look at the financials of your business all the time. You have to think about pricing. And so to the point of democratizing some of these capabilities, I think that the idea of your personal seller is, a lot of the people who are starting, for example, a commerce brand, the thing they really want to do is think about merchandising, think about brand, talk to their consumers, and think about growth. Everything else, they might actually want a lot of automated help with. So just one example for you. there's a wealth of ideas out there. Opportunity on its own doesn't mean value creation, and so we'll think about now a little bit where the value concentrates. I just want to talk about really two ideas. So the last great, I've been an investor for about 14 years now, and that means I got to the technology world kind of midstream for the cloud computing shift, early for the enterprise, right? And cloud wasn't just a new technology. It was a new business model. It turned software into a utility you could rent. And what that did was dramatically increase the consumption of software, right? Before, if it was just like, well, you got to deploy SAP, and you got to host SAP, and you have to have your SAP developers. Incredible company, but that meant, only a certain number of companies could have a database for their people and financials, right? With SaaS, if people can figure out how to match the workflows of your particular business, then you can rent it online for $20 a month. I think that AI pushes this one step further. And if cloud was about renting compute or capability, AI is eventually going to be about buying outcomes. There are a bunch of different reasons for this, but I think the natural evolution of software is going to be selling the outcome and being closer aligned to customer value. I think this would be a really big shift because anytime you offer different pricing to a customer, there's just complexity involved, especially a B2B one. But what this allows companies to do and builders is actually take both responsibility for and value capture from their quality, right? And so if you're working on customer support, if I can resolve 70 or 80% of tickets, and the next company that's doing this can only resolve 50 within a certain level of SLA, right? My customer experience is still at this quality level, then I should get paid for that. And the company should, my customer should choose me for that. And so this is a claim I would make, which is think about selling the outcome, not the seat. Also because, perhaps unpopularly, I do think the number of seats in different roles will move around over time as we can automate some of this work. The second thing I just mentioned around value is, so in the 3 years the fund has been going, the belief that everything is just a thin wrapper and everything consolidates in value to the couple foundation model labs has gone up and down. I think this is all kind of nonsense, right? The world is really large. The ability for one company to attack everything in the world is quite constrained by focus and organizational capability, if nothing else. But I think this has become even more clear over the last few years. And I'd say, we love the labs. We co-invest with the labs. We do a bunch of work with them. They are gifting the world with enormous capability in their research. But last year's model, as Sam himself said, is a commodity. And it's hard to overstate how quickly the costs of inference are collapsing. For many of us, we're I see companies where people want to start a consumer software company and inference costs $10 a day. And I'm wow, that's not going to work right now at scale. We're going to bleed a lot of money. But I am so confident that the cost curve continues because there's a ton of competition, and the big companies are committed to it from a democratization perspective. GPT-4 inference went from $30 per million tokens to $2 in 18 months. Right? You can draw the lines. Distilled models that offer much of the same capability, especially when you give them tools like search, are 10 cents. Right? And so if last year's model is a commodity, and then we're several years behind, if we think about the tools section that we talked about, in sort of ingesting all of the capabilities, last year's model is pretty good, right? And so I feel very safe in building atop a competitive ecosystem as application-level entrepreneurs and builders. Okay, so if the defensibility for most companies outside of the labs in their core use cases doesn't come from the model, that raises the next question, why aren't we seeing more useful and defensible products yet? I think we're seeing a lot, but I also think there's a question of expectation. I do think all the time, why doesn't this thing that I believe should exist from a core research capability exist, right? And so I answer a lot of my email but not all of it. My team trolls me because I don't answer enough of it. Why doesn't it do that? Why didn't it create this presentation for me? Why doesn't it handle invoicing in my company? The gap between the benchmark charts. We are amazing at solving these math competition problems, or even like crazy things like conjecture, and everyday utility is the big gap that is kind of the opportunity for everybody in this room, building, and then the pain of actual distribution, right? I think most people in companies understand that part is equally hard and equally valuable. But on the building side, we see 3 core challenges. One, happy evals launch, Statsig team. We think the evals that most people in the industry have are faulty, right? They just don't match what real users want. The same model that aces this math Olympiad will fail at routine business tasks because they have a different type of jagged intelligence than humans do. And evaluation setups will assume a bunch of things that are not realistic, right? They want evaluation setups in benchmarking, or in many companies, they assume neat IID tasks. And customers do not care about this proof of capability. They're like, okay, well, sometimes this pipeline breaks, and I deal with this customer in this way, and well, the website, is going to change. And if your agent can't do that, it's actually not useful to me, even if it can do math Olympiad. And so one is, I think we're evaluating the wrong way, and it will be a generation of builders that figure out how to match those evaluations to real customer use cases. The second is context, right? The most common researcher metaphor for the models today is like, you hire a PhD. But that PhD is not that useful on day one. In every company, in every function, most people have a ramp, right? How do we do things here? What is the context you need to know? And the opportunity is to capture and package that context for these models, and then take those outputs and surface them in the right way with the right guard. That's the product work of the future. I would say, if we think about what makes companies defensible in the next age, all of this product work has changed, and it is really hard. And then all of the things that made company building before, this is perhaps my most traditionalist view, is still really hard, right? So what do we have? We have recruiting is hard, distribution is hard, building customer trust is hard, just getting people to give you a shot, scaling an organization. And so I think it is both the time of most opportunity and a time where companies are no less defensible than they used to be. For AI, for this data-driven audience, I will say, data is the key. Everybody in AI understands this. And for AI companies, you have many opportunities to build an advantage in data, from proprietary licenses to crawl to feedback loops from your own product to paying for human data collection. These are things that all of our companies do that seem to, or some of our companies do in the portfolio that all seem to create advantage. I think also an unsatisfying answer I have on the defensibility problem is a strong belief of mine, where this is a time of massive change and execution matters, right? Execution buys you momentum, and scale are actually the moat to some degree. It's not a really structural, satisfying answer, but when you look at the early winners, let's take Cursor as an example. I think Cursor had a lot of, I know, because I was in the discussion, had a lot of mixed opinions at the beginning, right? People would say, you don't own the model, and you don't own the IDE. It looks a lot like VS Code, because it was, right? And so, what do you own? But the product work of orchestrating these models, diffs, merges, embeddings, packaging and prompting context skillfully to work with a not unlimited context window, supporting bigger actions like multi-file changes, developer experience of green is add, red is delete. All these basic things made the product the most useful thing for builders at the time. And I think whatever the beliefs on strategy at the beginning, this is a company that is now a multiple of revenue size of GitHub Copilot, and I think in a really enviable position. And I think that adoption can become very hard to compete with, because that momentum allows you to build upon itself. You hire more people, you get better opportunity to collect data if you want to train, and your ability to be more ambitious grows with your scale. I don't think it's automatic, right? So let's take a different example. I don't mean this in any malice, but people remember the company Jasper, which has less relevance than it did a few years ago. Jasper raised $125 million, right? It got to revenue scale pretty quickly. But the reality was, if people don't remember what it was copywriting help. But it was a series of prompts in like a text box with really good SEO against a real use case. So there was value creation, but not value defensibility. Because given you're not doing a bunch of things around context management, fitting into workflow, learning about your customer, creating defensibility over time, at some point, ChatGPT made an update, and then ChatGPT was just as good at this sort of copywriting. And that update really looked more like marketing around this specific use case, right? And so I think that there is an opportunity in this era to build things that are really useful to users at a point in time and use that momentum to do much more. So I would argue like all software is a wrapper. It's a wrapper on infrastructure. It's a wrapper on databases. Like CRUD is a wrapper layer. But the question is like, can you go from thin to thick? Are you continually ambitious? If you have that customer trust and that trust drives adoption, then you've started a flywheel that is actually incredibly defensible. The good news is the compounding cycle is just beginning. And so for every incumbent, it creates like continual anxiety. I see this from the CEOs I've worked with of companies at scale. And for every new player, it does mean that you operate at a different pace, where you have new opportunity and also new threat. I would close by saying I think we're still really early. And the set of people in this room and builders in general that like figure out how to operate in this era when building product is a different iterative cycle are going to be massively valuable in the future and build the things that people end up wanting to use and delivering AI to every use case in the world. If you think back to the iPhone, Instagram appeared 4 years later, Uber 5, DoorDash 6. The real breakout companies were not necessarily the first movers. They thought really hard, experimented, reimagined what was possible from mobile, and it did take a little bit. And I think we're at the same stage for AI, with the difference being that the board is getting reshuffled all the time, right? And so you have every round is a new game. For startup founders, that instability is a great opportunity. Let me leave you with this. You are the vanguard of people who know how to build with data. You got the magic first, right? Technical teams, they not only have the ability to go investigate and understand this stuff, they can build it for others. And then they got the leverage of like engineering and technical tools that made them even more powerful. And so if you believe in this magical alien capability, but also that there's a huge gap between where we are and what it could do in everyone's daily lives, like that is a huge opportunity. A stat I'll leave you with, 40%, I mean, it's a skewed company in terms of focus on this, but more than 40% of Anthropic usage today is math or coding. I do not think that is going to be the eventual consumption of intelligence in the world, right? But you need that layer of experimentation, understanding, product building, distribution to get it out there. And so every workflow, save me from my email, but every workflow that runs on our existing software that creates a ton of toil, that is your opportunity. And that would actually be my challenge in the end. Like, don't be afraid of the labs. They are delivering an amazing capability to the world, but the world is very big. And I hope you build something revolutionary where people look back on this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and say, I can't believe we used to do this in a different way. Thank you.